What's up folks, Jeff Everhart here. In this video, we'll explore how to send web push notifications using Node.js. Using the Node push notifications library, we can send messages that feel like native OS notifications directly to a user's browser. In this video, we'll cover how to create a notification server in Express, how to subscribe to web push notifications from the browser, and then create a service worker to handle push events in the background. So let's get started. I wanted to call out 3 links I left in the video description below. There you'll find a link to the written guide that this whole video is based on, a link to the GitHub repository that contains all the code I'll use in this demo, and lastly, a link to a site where you can generate your VAPID keys to send browser push notifications. So I went ahead and cloned this repository down locally, and I've already gone through a couple of the setup steps, including getting my VAPID keys from this website and putting those inside of my project. And then I've also run npm install already to generate this node modules folder. From here, we can go into our terminal and run node server.js to start our local server on port 3000. And then we can visit localhost 3000 in the browser to see what this looks like. So when we visit this website for the first time, the browser is going to ask for our permission to show push notifications. If I click allow, we should see that we get this nice push notification sent from knock localhost 3000 with the knock knock message. So let's take a look in the next couple of steps at how that happens. We've got 3 main files that we're going to look at today in sort of 3 parts to this project. The first one is what occurs on the server. So this is the actions that send the push notification to the browser. We've also got a main.js file, which handles all of our client-side logic like registering the service worker and subscribing to push notifications. And then we have a service worker file that is responsible for showing us that notification when a push event reaches the browser. So let's go through these one by one, and let's start by talking about what's in server.js. So this is an Express application, and here we're just loading some of those dependencies like Express, this body parser middleware, and this path middleware. And then we're also loading this push notifications library, which is what handles sending push notifications to the browser. From there, we're just going to create a new Express app, and then we'll set up some static paths, tell Express using the body parser middleware to parse JSON bodies. Then we're also going to add this middleware function here that's basically going to set us up with some pretty permissive CORS, which is cross-origin resource sharing settings, which means that if you wanted to have an application from another domain connect to this notification server, you could do that here. So we're allowing any other origin to connect. We're allowing all of these other methods as well. And so this is a pretty permissive setup. You might not want to do this in a production environment, but for testing, this is fine. Below that, we actually use the values of our VAPID keys. And VAPID stands for Voluntary Application Server Identity. So this is basically us creating a unique key to identify our server to the browsers. These are 2 values. One is public, which is stored here on the server and also in the client file we'll look at, and then the private key, which should always be stored on the server. Now, this private key absolutely should be private, so in a production setup, I would want to move this to an environment variable. So right below that, we have an app.post route handler on the subscribe route. So when somebody makes a post request to subscribe, we're going to run this callback function that takes a request and a response. From the request, we're going to pull out the body, and that body is going to be our push notification subscription from the browser. So this is data that the browser is sending to the server to inform it of our push notification subscription. After that, we create this constant variable called settings, where we define some of the variables that we'll need to actually send our web push notifications, like our VAPID details and a couple of other settings that you can just use these defaults for. Below that, we're going to create another variable by calling a new instance of the push notifications class and passing in the settings we just defined. And then we'll create a payload. And this is what's going to get sent to the browser as a part of our push notification message. And then pretty much from there, we just send that message. So we call the push.send, The first argument is going to be the subscription that we got from the browser. So the details about how to contact the browser, the payload, which we just defined, and then a callback function that's basically going to log out whether or not this was successful, like you can see in the console down here. Now from there, we've also got these several get route handlers that are basically just serving our static assets. So it's serving this index.html file, it's serving our two JavaScript files, and we're using those in the browser. Okay, so awesome. So let's make one edit here. And what I'm going to do is after we pull out this subscription variable, let's go ahead and just console log that on the server, just so that we can sort of see what that looks like. And then we'll need to come down here. We'll need to restart our server for that server side change to take effect. And let's actually from here go into our main.js file and see what's happening on the browser. So we already know what's happening on the server. We're responding to this post request that gets sent to the subscribe endpoint. We're pulling out the subscription that the browser sends us, sort of configuring our push notification library, and then we're just sending that push notification back to the browser. Now let's see how all that works in the client side. So I'm going to open up this main.js file, and I'm also going to come over here and open up the client. And we can go ahead and let's go ahead and just refresh that page. And we can see here that we're doing a bunch of console logging, and we also got our push notification again. So this is really helpful to sort of just show you the process that the browser goes through as it registers this service worker and sort of sets us up to accept push notifications. So as you recall, the first time we loaded this page, we had to give it permission, right? And so that's an important aspect of this. And if you deny it, it'll fail and you'll get some error messages. But let's walk through this main.js file step by step and sort of see what's happening in here. So I mentioned that we needed to also include our public VAPID key in our client side code. So we do that here at the top. And then really sort of the basics of this is if there's a service worker in the navigator, which is sort of like a window-like object, right? The browser, basically. We're going to call this send function and catch an error, okay? And so then we need to step through our send function. So if the service workers are enabled, which is important because some browsers don't enable service workers, then we're going to run all this code. So the first thing that we're going to do is console log out that we're registering our service worker, okay? And then we're going to call this function right here. So we're going to await this async function navigator.serviceworker.register. We pass it a file path and give it a scope, right? So we're saying here's this service worker file, which is what's in swjs. And here's the scope that I want that service worker to operate under. And assuming that's successful, we console log out that the service worker's registered. Now this is kind of neat because if we dig into the browser and go over to application, click into service workers, we can actually see some details about the service worker that we've registered, right? The source, when it was received, and we can like deregister it if we wanted to do that. We can also see down here some of the background services that a service worker is going to work under, and we'll sort of dig into that in a little bit, right? But so we've gotten this far, right? We've checked if service workers are available in the browser. If they are, we run this send function, which first registers our service worker. And it's important to also call out that each time we load this page, we're going to register this service worker. And that's because you might want to update the service worker in the background. So this sort of happens every time the browser loads. So we've done that. We've registered our service worker. And assuming that that's successful, then we're going to register for push notifications. So we create this new variable called subscription. And then we're going to await our service worker registration, which is what this variable ends up being. And then we're going to use this push manager object to subscribe. Then we're going to basically say this is only visible to that user. And then we're going to pass in that application server key, but we're going to have to do a little bit of encoding to get it into a different format. So you'll see down here that there's this URL base64 to uint8 array. So these are two different sort of encoding formats, and that's all we're really doing here is translating between them. Then we'll go ahead and log out that our push notification has been successfully registered. Right, so we've gotten a subscription from the browser. If we come back into our console, right, so we're right about here. Then the next thing we're going to do is we'll log out sending push. And then we're going to make a fetch request out to our server file, right, at that subscribe endpoint with the post method. We're going to JSON stringify our subscription, right? This is the body that we pulled out here. And then we're going to just set some headers, and we'll go ahead and log push.sent. And if we go ahead, now that we added that additional console log in here, we logged out that subscription so that we can see what data the browser's sending back, right? So it's sending the key that we sent, and it's also sending this endpoint. And this endpoint is sort of the unique identifier that our push notification library uses to actually route our push notification to the right browser, right? So we requested this, sort of Google handles this for us, gives us this endpoint that corresponds to the browser and the subscription. And then we use that to trigger the push notification behind the scenes. Okay, so cool. So that's the basics of our client side code, right? And now let's dig into the service worker. So service workers are a concept in the browser that fulfill a lot of different functions. If we come over here to application, we can see that there are all of these sort of background services. And a good way that the MDN docs describe service workers is that they're small proxy servers that live in the browser that can intercept requests between your client-side code and your application. And so that's sort of exactly what we're doing here, right? We're console logging out this service worker loaded function, and then we're going to add this event listener for the push event. But there are other events that service workers can accept, like fetch. I think it can also accept a navigation. But we're listening for a push event. And when that happens, we're going to extract the data that we get back from this event. And that's going to be pretty much equivalent to what we sent from the server. So after that, we'll just log out this push received message. And then down here, we're going to use this self method again. Basically, it's a way of saying, this service worker, right? So we're adding this to the service worker. And then we're saying registration, which was a service worker property, show notification. So we're calling this method, passing in the title that we received from the server, and then specifying a body for our message. There are other options you could pass in as well. So like, for example, if we, save this and refresh, you'll see that the icon here is the Chrome icon. But there are a bunch of other options. You could customize this. I think you can also customize vibration and maybe how it alerts people, whether it's silent or not. So there's a lot of options that I believe you can also pass into this show notification method, but that's basically what this service worker is responsible for. So just to recap how this works, we'll go back to our main.js file and sort of kick it off from there, right? So a user loads this page in the browser. We request access to send them notifications. And sort of we would run through this send function where we're going to register our service worker. Once we've registered the service worker, we're going to go ahead and subscribe to push notifications using the push manager. And then we'll send that subscription off to the server. And in a production deployment, you'd probably want to actually store that to subscription, right? Because that's the endpoint. So you might not want to send that every time. That's really something that you might want to request once and then send again, like send and store in a database. So we're sending that to the server, right? The server processes all that information, pulls out the subscription from our post request, constructs its own push library to send a request, right? We call push.send with the subscription, the payload. It's responsible for routing that push notification through this endpoint, and then it's all received by our service worker. And so again, maybe we can come down here. Let's go in push notifications, and then we'll go ahead and click this record button. And then if we refresh, we can see, we get some of these notifications sent from, and we get some information about them. We can see the body and the title, the event that's happening. Now down here, we can do the same thing. Like if we look at the push messaging, right? We can see when the push message was received, when it was dispatched, when it was completed. So there are all these events that are firing in the background that this service worker is listening to that are going to help you sort of route that notification appropriately. Awesome. Thanks for watching. Web push notifications are a great way to send users of your site important messages. Even though Nock doesn't provide a web push channel yet, we wanted to create this resource because web push is something that can be kind of tricky to set up. If a browser push service is something you would use, or there are other messaging channels you think Knock should support, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and knock on.